I think it's safe to say that whenever you don't hear from me for a couple of weeks, it's not because there was no misogyny. If anything, the news cycle these days gives me choice paralysis, a fact that'll be reflected in how far-flung the stories we're talking about today are. So we're going to start in South Carolina, which I know it doesn't seem that far-flung given that it literally borders the state that I'm in, but you have to fling from somewhere. So it turns out that South Carolina's legislature is looking for ways to make their abortion laws even more draconian, which, if you know anything about how bad South Carolina's abortion laws already are, is almost impressive. But this new measure, Senate Bill 323, would do away with the existing exemptions for rape, incest, and fetal deformity. It would also outlaw the manufacture, distribution, and possession of drugs intended to cause abortions. But that's just the warm-up to the fact that it would make having an abortion a felony subject to up to 30 years in prison, on par with murder charge. Hell, this bill is so bad that I don't even have room to discuss its efforts to make contraception illegal. But they're there. Now, the bill's sponsors call it a logical next step after passing their already Handmaid's Tale-esque heartbeat bill. Of course, that's incorrect because the logical next step after passing a law like that is repealing it. But if you're on the anti-abortion side, it's kind of hard to argue otherwise. I mean, call me conspiratorial, but there's something about the "we think it's murder, but we'd never dream of punishing the women that had them" line that always struck me as disingenuous. At least half of that sentence has to be a lie. But in reality, both halves. And from there, we'll fling this segment over to the South Carolina of Central Asia, Afghanistan, where I think we can all agree women's rights aren't doing great. Since the Taliban retook control, women's rights have been eroding as fast as women's rights in America under Trump. Yes, I can't really cast stones, but there's actually good news on that front. Earlier this month, the UN created a committee specifically tasked with investigating abuses of women's rights in the Taliban-led country. Of course, it's the UN, so they're not going to actually be able to do anything, and I'm sure that women who have been stripped of their rights to learn and vote and work and participate in society won't take much comfort in it. But it's still important. The idea is that this group will be putting together and preserving all the evidence that would be needed to convict people of war crimes and crimes against humanity in international courts. And if that does nothing but isolate the perverse fucks driving this persecution, at least it's doing that. Yeah, sorry, when I promise good news on this segment, you shouldn't expect much. But I want to close on something even worse. See, the whole reason the UN thing can matter is because Afghanistan ultimately wants to be part of the international community. And the international community has made a modicum of gender equality a minimum for full participation. But the New York Times ran a really depressing piece last week that showed how the retreat from women's rights in the U.S. is leading to a worldwide erosion. And that should surprise no one. Commitment to women's rights has long been one of the best proxies for a nation's commitment to democracy. And with hopes that that chilled your bones as much as it was supposed to, I'll wrap things up and hand you back over to Noah, Heath, and Eli.